Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I'm here with Megan. Megan agreed to come on to this podcast to talk about her experience participating in the Bio-Mystical Womb Apprenticeship. And I'm so glad that you're with us, Megan, and that you um, joined us for the apprenticeship. I know you have your own programs, womb-centered healing programs yourself, and so it's my delight and honor to support you in deepening your womb-centered healing journey. So thank you, and thank you for coming on to share about your experience of the apprenticeship. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. You talked about how it supported your own personal journey, and then we were also discussing earlier how you've been learning skills that you can apply professionally as well in your own program. So please share with us what that is, what that's been like for you.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And I'm so honored and totally grateful and glad to be here speaking into my experience in the Bio-Mystical Womb Healing Apprenticeship. So you just want me to get started in sharing my experience?
Yeah, I'd love to share some of the highlights that you remember for your personal growth. And yeah, we'll start there and then we can continue from there.
Okay, wonderful. So right now in the apprenticeship, I'm in like kind of the very beginning phases still. I've gone through the conception and the regestation and the rebirthing, and now I'm in the remothering process. So I've been taking time and spaciousness with this program. Usually I'm somebody who really jumps into things and tries to go really fast, and I very intentionally have been slowing down to breathe more deeply into these practices. And what I've been really loving the experience of having the support to basically what feels like rewriting my womb story. Um, there's been so much healing I've done around remothering and so much womb healing that I've done already. And to be able to do it in this process, like from the beginning, has been really deeply healing because Sama has included a lot of questionnaires. And I think I'm usually somebody who really resists journaling or reflecting. I just want to do the thing and then move on from it. And, the way that she's designed this is she's included these questionnaires as an integral part. And so I've been doing a lot of contemplation and reflection, which is something I often skip. And I've been finding that's really been helping me to integrate more of what I've been like the healing processes that I've been doing in the ceremonies or in the different practices. It's really helping me to make more connections mentally and cognitively of what's going on, and being able to talk to my parents, because in some of the questionnaires she'll ask you to have conversations with your parents and to revisit those times in your lives. And that was really healing for me, being able to, I've heard a lot about my birth story. That's something that my family has told me about, but to really just go through and ask them specific questions that maybe when I was a younger version of myself, didn't realize that some of those things would be important to ask about. Like, for instance, like, was I breastfed and for how long, and questions like that. But it was just like really empowering for me to actually help rewrite some of like these deep woundings that I've been having for a long time. And one of those wounds that I've been working through pretty consciously for like the last, I don't know, 3 years. It's just been different layers, but one of them has been the wound of abandonment. And that one has been really confusing to me because I haven't felt like abandoned by my parents in particular. And so being able to really reflect on what was going on in my parents' life and my ancestors' life, it's really helped to liberate me and to see that some of the deep wounding that I've had of maybe not belonging or feeling abandoned or feeling unloved, that it wasn't really mine. And it wasn't because I wasn't unloved, but it was actually just wounds that I was carrying forward from my ancestors. And from experiences that maybe my mother was going through, and being able to see that was so liberating for me, because all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, like I now am really, really, really understanding that this wasn't mine, and it was helping me to have deeper, more visceral experiences of like, oh, I am loved, I do belong, I am, I am so held, I am so supported. And when I was able to kind of like see that difference, and that those wounds weren't really mine, that it's been easier for me to invite in that healing experience. So that's probably been the deepest and most profound healing that I've received so far in the apprenticeship.
Yeah, that I refer people to that. Particularly, did you do the remothering opening ceremony, where we practice giving back to our mother or the ancestors the portion of whatever emotional pattern or wounding we're dealing with actually belongs to them and doesn't belong to us? Was that kind of where that aha moment came in for you?
You know what? I actually think that that came in before the ceremony. And sometimes you know how these things work, where when time and space doesn't really exist, and it's almost like when you're about to step into something, you almost already start receiving the initiation and the wisdom and the lesson of that. I think it
Mhm.
was kind of that, because I think what had happened was I had filled out the questionnaire, the
Mhm.
remothering questionnaire, which was really powerful for me. And that was when I had the realizations. And then you did the ceremony, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just like, and so it really further integrated what had happened from the questionnaire. And then
Mhm.
it really helped to have more of the ceremonial, alchemical holding container to do that as well.
I probably had some questions in the questionnaire that started that process. It sounds like for you, thinking back on it, because I mean, for me too, the reason I ask is that this has been one of the most profound healing parts for me in my work with reparenting and ancestral healing and rebirthing, is to start and activating womb power, because our womb power, uh, one of the womb's powers, if we're looking at the biomystical powers of the womb, which biomystical, in my way of using that term, means that our we have a certain biology that can be seen as a map for our mystical potentials and our mystical experiences. And so the biology of the womb, there's a certain point, when the womb is getting ready to birth a baby,
Mhm.
when the placenta can easily separate and differentiate between the baby and the mother, and the mother keeps everything that belongs to her, and the baby takes everything that belongs to the baby in a healthy pregnancy and birth. Now, there's plenty of complications around that, and if we start to look at what the mystical nature of that is, how that biology symbolizes, um, our how we can develop emotionally and spiritually, which I include emotional development as part of our mystical development, because if we have spiritual development without emotional development, it's disembodied, right? Our emotions are our embodied spirit wisdom. And so and so if we look at how that process is symbolic of being able to differentiate between what belongs to the mother and what belongs to the baby, um, that's an important womb power, and it's not developed in our society. Even though we suffer from so much separation, most of the time we're separated because we try to create we try to, we don't want to feel someone else's pain, and so we separate ourselves from them. But the truth is, we're really just feeling their pain and sort of painting over it with this idea of separation. That's not mine. I don't have to feel their pain. Right? And so practicing healthy differentiation and saying, okay, that actually, I'm clear in my body what belongs to them and what belongs to me. And I can feel that with them, but I don't have to take it on. Then that actually fosters greater intimacy, like what you were just sharing about how going and talking to your parents about these things probably fostered some intimacy for you, more than you'd had before with your parents. And that's been my experience too with, I've had all these conversations with my mom and my grandma and all that. And so that healthy differentiation of taking full ownership of our own stuff and giving whatever we tried to take on or did take on, just because we're not trained how to have those healthy boundaries. We're trained to that in other ways, right? That we don't develop that womb power, right? As women, as womb bearers, we're taught to take on everybody else's pain and to hold on to it ourselves. And especially as young children, as young womb bearers, without being initiated into any of that, if our parents are suffering from pains of their own that they've carried from their generations back, our instinct is to want to help them shoulder the burden, and we just naturally absorb, and we're meant to absorb their emotional state, because that's how we learn to have healthy emotional states. And healthy emotional development is by merging with them, particularly with our mothers. But if when we merge with our mothers, all we feel is pain, and our mothers are modeling how to like stuff it down and hold it inside, then that's what we learn how to do. And we take on some of their pain too, because we want to somehow make them feel better, because it's scary to have your caretaker being in so much pain. It kind of threatens your very existence, right? So that's the whole background of why this is so important to me, to learn that healthy differentiation so that we can be present with what's current. And it's also, having healthy differentiation for what's present and what was in the past. This is another way that we can heal from past wounds. So I'm so glad that stood out as the most important, profound part, because for me, I agree, it is too. Well, I went on and on about that. I really want to get back to, because it is so profound and important, I really want to get back to, you talked about skills that you're learning from the apprenticeship that you've been able to then turn around and apply to your own professional work, offering womb-centered healing practices and programs for your students. So I'm really curious to hear what skills you're learning from the program in that regard.
Yeah. I feel like what I've been really applying into my work has been the way that I have historically led ceremonies and temples has been a very inward, alchemical healing kind of visualization creative journey. And you do that, but you also include movement and dancing. And I just absolutely love that, because so that's been something that I have started including in my own practice, but also in some of more of the temples that I'm leading, is adding in more of that somatic piece, because I'm also a yoga teacher. And so I do a lot of the movement-based practices, but I've never really incorporated more movement-based in a temple space. I've done it in other capacities, but in terms of womb healing and goddess work, I hadn't really included those two aspects. And I really love bringing in that somatic piece of the movement into the actual ceremonies and into that temple space. So that's been something.
Can you share a little bit more about why you feel that's so beneficial? Because I could go on and on about that too, but I'd love to hear your perspective about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel that it's really important because like we just store, energy can get stored in different parts of our body. And so I find there's a place for stillness, and I really do like stillness-based practices, but I like being able to apply it to different cycles in the moon of when you're going to be more still, like when you're bleeding, for instance, and having more of that inward kind of journey is really beneficial. Like that really deep holding space is something that's viscerally, I think, really important for the body. But there's also parts of the processes, and and where a woman is in her cycle, or also maybe the intention of the ceremony of what's going on. um, the movement can really help to move that energy, so it's not getting like stuck in the hips, or it's not getting stuck in the tissues or the emotions. um, but I feel like that movement piece helps to kind of bring it more into the body, bring the healing more grounded and into the body, and getting the energy moving. And so I find the movement is a process of liberation.
Mm.
And also it helps to get into the feeling body a little bit more. I find it brings in more of that mind body connection, or the womb brain connection, and bringing in that component of feeling, to me, brings further integration into that experience of being more present.
Mm. Beautifully said. Thank you. Yeah, for me, as I started learning about womb stagnation or blood stagnation being one of the main, um, most common causes for womb unwellness,
Mm-hmm.
menstrual unwellness, um, it became very clear to me. And before I even started learning about that, my body just wanted to move. I'd been practicing stillness-oriented yoga for quite a long time, and one of my teachers towards the end of my time with him was having us lie completely still and wait for the energy to move our body.
Mm-hmm.
And another one of my teachers was sharing about how when you are physically active, then you needed to match that time with stillness practices, supported restorative stillness practices, which I love that aspect of it. But this laying there and waiting for the energy to move you, I mean, it was just like this mind trip, you know. Is that the energy moving me, or am I thinking that, moving myself? It was just this mind trip, and that was the beginning of the end for my work with that teacher, because it was like, yeah, I need to move my body, and that's the energy that's moving me. I need to move my body. And even with this other one, where the matching any active time with stillness time, it was like, okay, so when do I do the other activities that I need to do in my life? Right? Like go to work, and it just, at a certain point, to integrate these practices into your life, it's like, no, I have a period of time that I have available to do some practices that are nurturing for me. And in that period of time, I need movement. I need to express myself through my voice. I need to have deep visionary journeying. I need to address all of these things. So let's do it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And they all support each other. And that way I'm not just, somehow retreating into practice day in and day out and expecting someone else to feed me and give me clothing. And, I just don't, that's not happening in my life. I don't have a trust fund, it's like, that's just not the reality. And so that became a real practical way. And then when I started working with that, even in the apprenticeships that I attended, and there were these stillness practices, lying still and doing these deep visionary things, I would just be getting up and dancing with them because my body needed to move. And that was the time for my self-care, was that hour or so of practice for the day. And so I would listen to the meditation while dancing and moving. And so that's how that came to be. And I love how you're feeling the benefit of that weaving together for all of that. So thank you for sharing about that. Any other skills that you're also gathering from this experience?
Definitely. And there's probably still so many more than I can recall in this moment. But the other thing that was coming to me was a lot of the just learning different rituals to connect with different parts of my my, my womb cycle. So for instance, things like the placenta pouch and things like the little sachets, like the ancestral sachets. So really learning just different rituals that I can do that can be part of my healing process and that can serve different, you know, times in my life. Like I remember the creation of the placenta pouch was actually really potent for me as well. I didn't even actually create the pouch. Something that I don't do a lot of like creating in terms of sewing and artwork and stuff like that, but even just the creativity of acquiring the objects and the meaning that all of the objects went into this pouch, was really powerful. And so just learning rituals like that are things that I haven't started integrating into my work, but I do have a program, like a rebirthing program, that I want to be expanding. So I definitely would love to be including some of these rituals that help to, it just helps to make the energetic healing, because you can you can revisit these times in your life through the temple space, and you can kind of multidimensionally travel back in time. But it's also really powerful and tangible to have third dimensional rituals that can actually be a bit of a placeholder for that. So I can't physically travel back in time to access my placenta, but you have this like third dimensional representation of the placenta pouch in which you can have that reconnection with. So things like that. And I can't remember all of the different rituals, but I know just the whole ancestral part where you were talking about the different smudges and the different sachets that you could put underneath your pillow, but just all of the different rituals and ways to be able to connect with ancestors through herbs. That was something I had never learned before, never experienced. And so these aren't things that I've been applying in my practice, but they're things that I've been kind of incorporating into my life. And I imagine when the time is ripe and it feels like it's the time to integrate and share, that maybe some of these rituals will be included.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And, you know, there's also something that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation here today, of this idea of how you were intentionally slowing down to allow more spaciousness with the practices, where you might have before been the one to be the first to complete all the assignments, right? Like a good student. I'm the same way. And what's that?
That's usually
Right. Yeah, the top of the class and getting everything done. And so, and you, I think you also mentioned the whole homeopathic idea of, just there's some approaches that I'm presenting in the apprenticeship that seems like either maybe you made that decision to slow down already, or maybe you listened to the intro podcast and were like, yeah, that feels like I was longing for that. My goodness, thank you, for articulating that, or whatever it felt. I'm curious if that's a skill that is being nurtured and developed that you see perhaps yourself applying in some of your programs and what you share. That slowing down, that homeopathic approach where less is more.
Yeah, I think integration and deeper embodiment with that spaciousness and integration, I think, has been something that I've been definitely receiving from the mentorship. And then I've noticed, like, in the programs that I offer for clients, I usually include a lot of stuff, but I haven't included as much time for like connection and reflection and contemplation. So I've been including more questionnaires and more check-ins and more things like that to help elicit some more of that connection of the of what's going on internally, but then being able to kind of have more of that cognitive understanding as well. So I've definitely been thinking about more integration and spaciousness, and inviting in that contemplative, those in contemplative practices as well. So I have started actually including more questionnaires in my program because I've just found it so helpful. Yeah.
You know, you're not the only one who shared about the questionnaires being so helpful. And initially, I was creating the questionnaires because there's people who are participating in the program as case studies that are submitting writings about their experience to be included in the book, right, that I'm writing about this healing process. But I've been hearing so much about how helpful the questionnaires are that I'm wanting to tell the people who aren't case study participants to perhaps utilize the questionnaires for their integration and their reflection and self-inquiry as well, and perhaps making those questionnaires be an integral part of the program, whether you're wanting what you write to be included in the book or not, that it could just be a private thing that I get, that that you share with me about um, your experiences with the material and your reflections and your insights and your integration process, which then informs me about what else needs to be addressed in the material that we're creating for the next part of the apprenticeship. What or how it can be developed, because this whole program is in the developmental stages anyway. Since I love to develop things in relationship, I'm so grateful for the folks that are participating in that way. So, and I really appreciate your appreciation of those questionnaires, and that you're like, oh, kind of. So is there any specific ways, like what kinds of questions in the questionnaires? I don't know if you can even come up with any, but I'm curious as to what, I mean, because I just sort of go in there and aim the questions at reflection around the aspects of this healing work that have been most profoundly influential for me. So I'm curious if you see anything else or have experienced anything else or aspects of that about the specific types of questions that have been helpful, that you're maybe thinking of modeling some of your questionnaires after.
Yeah, you know what? It's hard for me to come up if it's a style of question, because I think it would be different for every person. But what has been so helpful for me is almost like maybe I just never would have even thought to ask that question, or maybe I wouldn't have even thought that that was relevant, or I wouldn't even have thought that that was helpful and important. So I think even just you asking the questions, because you ask so many questions sometimes, and so many specific questions about, like, especially in that initial, I don't remember which one it was, but it was just especially the rebirthing process. There were so many questions about who was there, what was your, was your father there, what was his role, was he being supportive, just so many specific questions of things that I never really, like, I knew my birthing story, but I didn't think about all of these little things, like how well did my mom feel supported, what was my dad doing, what were the other people doing, what happened. And so it was even just you asking all of those questions that helped to put a more complete picture together. And then that really helped me to recognize, I was like, this makes so much sense why I'm so connected and close to my paternal grandparents, because I was born in their house. My grandfather buried my placenta in his backyard. And I just started to see these roles that people were playing in my life, and how they were such anchors and such grounding forces when I had already known that I was close to them. But it just, like, really started to connect the dots and the pieces of, like, this is why they're so influential, because that, that's one of the most influential times in your life for creating a lifelong blueprint of how you experience the world. And so I think, I don't even know if it was the way you asked the questions. I think it was more of just like being given the opportunity to think of things that I didn't think about before. So I don't know if that helps.
It does, and actually it helps me to know how to help you to develop your own questionnaires, because it helps me see where those questions came from, that level of detail, and that those questions came out of my, you know, many years journey of going back to that blueprint time and again, and asking more questions, getting the story told to me again, and maybe there would be another piece that I missed from before, or, you know, asking my mother, you know, more details, what happened here and what happened there, and going on visionary journeys to revisit myself and writing about it, you know, being born and writing about it from various perspectives. And yeah, and we're going to be doing some of this work in the writing from the womb work. We're going to start meeting weekly for writing from the womb, where we can write our own journeys. We can write the story of our own traveling back to support any age of our younger self, or any ancestor that needs our support, so that this writing can also become, and this has been my experience in writing the book, that it can become my visionary healing work, my visionary ceremony. The writing itself can become that. So it's helping me to see how I can develop those questionnaires more. But if we, and for you perhaps too, to see that these questionnaires are a way that, to say them, to ask the questions in such a way that it invites the person who's doing the questionnaire to do a healing process right then and there as they're writing the answer. And perhaps I'm going to start weaving that into some of the future questionnaires. But also we're going to be sitting down and doing it together, creating that ceremony together in the writing from the womb calls that we'll be doing live starting in the next phase. So hopefully you'll be able to join us then for some of those. And those will continue throughout the rest of the, I feel, throughout the rest of the apprenticeship, because writing has become very central to my healing process as I've been working on this book. So it's deepening it every time I revisit these times and write the story, you know, based on the bits of information that I got from my parents, and then fleshing it out as though I'm there and seeing what's happening and smelling what's happening, and seeing it from my mother's perspective, and seeing it from my perspective, and seeing it from my future self coming back to support's perspective, and what I can offer as my future self visiting, and what that it's like for my infant self, what that's like for my mother, what that's like for the nurse that's caring for me. You know, all these details of just filling it out with my imagination and the information that's stored in my cells, the memory that's stored in my cells, letting that inform my imagination. And then it becomes a whole new rewriting of the story. And it's interesting because it doesn't take me to, like, you think that maybe the imagination, you would just go on these outlandish flights of fancy and completely, but the focus here is really on embodying and bringing medicine to what actually happened. So I'm not like changing the details of what happened, but I'm bringing womb medicine to the details of what happened. And so, like, my remenarche, you know, I didn't actually create a ceremony for I did here in present time. I invited her to join me in the present. But when I went and revisited the past, I didn't like make something happen in the past that didn't happen. What I did do was recognize and be present to the ways that I was unconsciously having my own menarche ceremonies, like sitting on the back porch on our 5-story apartment in San Francisco with a pomegranate and eating the pomegranate. I loved pomegranates as a kid, and my family would get these pomegranates, and I had a whole ritual about eating the pomegranate. You know, there was a whole ceremony involved. And so just starting to recognize, just going back and visiting and recognizing and witnessing ourselves, and whatever we manage to pull together for ourselves is really powerful too. So anyway, I can go on and on. Thank you so much for sharing about all of this. Is there anything else that you're really wanting to share about in your experience with the apprenticeship? What you're looking forward to even, or?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to really just continuing to deepen in. And I think what I'm also really looking forward to is I've kind of been because I'm a case study participant, it's given me, you know, I need to be writing like weekly kind of reportings of what's going on, which is something I wouldn't do it if I didn't have to do it. But what it's giving me is it's like helping me to write this like womb story. And I love that. And so I think I'm really looking forward to like just having all of this data of my womb story, you know, and then the more that I revisit these healings, I can go back and look and I can add. And so I think that's something that I'm really looking forward to, is like complete, it's never complete, but you know what I mean, adding to it and having a more complete story. And yeah, I've just been really grateful for the space. I've been really grateful for also the invitations from Sama to not be linear about the process, to be able to kind of jump in time and go back, and to create more spaciousness, and also kind of the idea of just weaving the womb centeredness into different parts of my life that maybe I didn't realize I was. Sometimes I can think that it's the practices of being in connection with the womb, but those are just really the reminders. But it's like being able to just see how my entire life is really womb centered, and how that wisdom is being integrated and brought forward in different ways that maybe I didn't see it before. So that's been something that I've been really receiving, is just expanding my definition and my understanding of what the womb is and how I interact with her every day, in different ways that maybe I didn't realize I was before. So yeah, that's been a really beautiful gift.
Yeah, and for me, I would go even so far as to say that the womb is actually running the show. And we can recognize that or not, but doesn't really change the fact. Yep. and I feel like a lot of the turbulence and difficulty we may have comes from not recognizing that, and not allowing space for that to be the case, and not, you know, and sort of unconsciously fighting against that, perhaps creating friction and like that, instead of nourishing and supporting that as a beautiful thing, that the life generating place inside of ourselves is actually the center of how things move and how life lives. And so, of course, that's running the show.
The one thing I also wanted to add is that it's been such a nourishing container to revisit some really challenging times. You know, there's so many approaches to healing, and sometimes it could be like talk therapy or something, but to be able to go back into those times that could potentially be really painful, it's just such a nourishing container that it doesn't feel painful. It just feels like liberating. It feels expansive and spacious and nurturing. So I appreciate the container of being able to heal in this capacity.
I'm curious, and I'm sure you have your own skills with that, and I'm curious if there's any particular ways that you notice, and you don't have to answer this question right now, but to develop your own skills in providing that kind of nourishing container for this deeper work, as you've expressed interest in creating longer, deeper programs, more, um, I put it to you as a living question that you don't have to answer now, but I'm also curious to hear what aspects of the program and the presentation and how it's put together create that nourishing container, because one of my big concerns and devotions is to be able to approach these healing processes and these times that might have been very traumatic in our lives without re-traumatizing ourselves. And that can often be the case with certain healing approaches, and I've studied that for quite some time and felt that for myself. I'm like, okay, how can I invite people into these places in a way that feels nurturing and invigorating, like you just described? So I'm curious how that might be something that nourishes your skills and your growth as a professional and a practitioner.
Yeah, I think something new, like new things that I've been learning have been even just at the beginning of your questionnaire, you preface it with grab a tea, beautify your space, make your space comfortable, slow down, and you just like have this whole paragraph about how to make this nurturing space, whereas before I might have just been like, okay, I'm just gonna like fill out this questionnaire because it's just a questionnaire. But even in that process, you like invite in that ceremonial space of like, make it like slow down, make it sacred, and give yourself that time after, because it's probably going to bring some stuff up, whether you recognize it in the moment or not. It might come up later. But even just prefacing that, sometimes later after those questionnaires and I'm like feeling a little bit wonky or angry or frustrated or whatever, I can be like, oh, I did this really deep healing and now I recognize that. And so I'm going to give myself permission to just slow down, take a bath, and so I think it's things like that um, that made it more nourishing. The songs in the ceremony, like the womb songs, is very nourishing to me. It just completely grounds me, and I find that very helpful. I love the sound and the vocals, so that also has created a really nourishing container.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, and I look forward to hearing as we proceed if any other things you realize, oh wow, this really helps with that and that really helps with that. I'd love to hear about that too. So I think our time's up. Thank you so much again for joining me. And listeners, if you want to learn more about the Bio-Mystical Womb Apprenticeship, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com and look into it there. And we're going to be starting the next round of the apprenticeship at the end of October. So there will be lots of opportunities, and just remember that no one is turned away for lack of funds. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved in the apprenticeship for whatever your means allow. So reach out to me if you have questions about it. And yeah, that's it. So thanks again, Megan, and we'll connect again soon. Many, many blessings.